It is February 4th, 1940. A small, trembling man sits alone in a cold cell beneath Moscow's Lubyanka prison. His name, Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov. Once, his signature meant death. Once, his voice could decide the fate of millions. Now, that same voice shakes as he whispers his last prayer. He had killed for Stalin. He had lived for Stalin. And tonight, he will die for Stalin. In 1936, Stalin needed someone new, someone loyal, someone ruthless, someone who wouldn't ask why. Genrikh Yagoda, the head of the NKVD, had grown too cautious, too hesitant to spill blood fast enough for Stalin's taste. Then came Nikolai Yezhov, barely 5 feet tall, soft-spoken, always nervous. But inside him burned something Stalin recognized: fear, obedience, and the hunger to please. According to historian Robert Conquest, Stalin saw in Yezhov a man who could be the perfect tool, unthinking, unquestioning, and utterly devoted. He was appointed People's Commissar for Internal Affairs. It sounded bureaucratic, just another desk job. But that desk would soon become the control panel of terror. Yezhov wasted no time. He signed execution lists the size of novels. He built networks of informants that reached every street, every office, every factory. And Stalin watched, silent, satisfied. Every night, trains full of prisoners rolled into the Gulags. Every morning, Stalin's desk received fresh reports. Enemies eliminated. Quotas met. For Stalin, Yezhov was the perfect servant. For the Soviet Union, he was the beginning of hell. In less than 2 years, over 700,000 people would die. And the man signing their deaths believed he was saving his country. By 1937, Nikolai Yezhov had become the most feared man in the Soviet Union. His orders carried more weight than any general's command. His name, whispered, never spoken aloud. Every day, he arrived at his office in the NKVD headquarters. A man drowning in paperwork and death warrants. Each file on his desk was a life. Each signature, a bullet. Under Yezhov, the Great Purge reached its darkest point. The prisons overflowed. The air in Moscow smelled of cold metal and fear. The night belonged to the NKVD trucks, black, silent, unstoppable. No one was safe. Not the soldiers who fought for Stalin. Not the scientists who built his future. Not even the men who called him friend. According to historian Simon Sebag Montefiore, Yezhov turned terror into an industry. He introduced execution quotas. Regions had to meet targets for arrests and shootings. If they failed, Yezhov's men executed the officers themselves. The NKVD didn't need proof. Confessions were enough. And if confessions didn't come, torture made sure they did. Men confessed to crimes they'd never heard of. Women confessed to being spies for countries they couldn't find on a map. Fear spread faster than truth. And Stalin? He watched from his Kremlin office. Every morning, he marked names on the lists Yezhov brought him. Sometimes he added a note beside them. Shoot. 10 years. Or simply, Yezhov knows. By the winter of 1938, The Soviet Union was bleeding, a nation eating itself alive. And at the center of it all sat Yezhov, Stalin's small, trembling shadow. He thought he was indispensable. He thought his loyalty protected him. But Stalin had already begun to look past him. Another name was rising. Another loyal man. Another tool. And for Yezhov, that meant his time was running out. By late 1938, the blood in the streets had begun to dry. But Stalin's paranoia never did. He had his purge. He had his fear. He had his control. Now he had a question. Who knew too much? And the first answer was Nikolai Yezhov. For 2 years, Yezhov had served like a machine. He built the system, signed the orders, filled the graves. But even the perfect executioner leaves footprints. The files were piling too high. Too many names. Too many missing men. Too many questions from abroad. So Stalin did what he always did. He erased the man who could expose him. A new figure arrived at the NKVD headquarters, Lavrentiy Beria. He was charming, intelligent, ruthless, and most importantly, Stalin's choice. To Yezhov, he was an ally. To Stalin, he was a replacement. According to historian Amy Knight, Stalin's method was simple. Use one man to destroy another, then use the next man to destroy him. At first, Stalin still smiled at Yezhov. He still invited him to banquets, still called him my little Iron Man. But everyone in the room knew what those smiles meant. They were the smiles given before the knife. Yezhov began to drink heavily. He couldn't sleep. He'd stare at the phone, waiting for it to ring, praying it wouldn't. When Stalin finally summoned him in November 1938, Yezhov tried to explain himself. He blamed his deputies, the NKVD officers, the enemies still hiding in the system. Stalin just listened, then said quietly, "You've done good work, Nikolai Ivanovich, but your time has passed." The next day, Yezhov's name was removed from official documents. His portraits vanished from offices. His signature no longer appeared on orders. It was as if he had never existed. The man who once erased millions was now being erased himself, and he knew it. Every night, he looked over his shoulder, waiting for the knock. The hunter had become the hunted. By 1939, the man once called the Iron Commissar was gone. Nikolai Yezhov, People's Commissar of Internal Affairs, the architect of the Great Purge, the man who signed death warrants by the thousands, now sat alone in a cell inside the Lubyanka prison. No guards saluted him anymore. No one whispered his name in fear. In Stalin's Russia, the executioner always became the next victim. He was interrogated, brutally, relentlessly. The same methods he perfected were now used on him. Sleep deprivation, isolation, endless questioning. The NKVD officers, once his subordinates, mocked him, called him bloody dwarf. He broke quickly. He confessed to everything: treason, espionage, conspiracy with Trotsky, plotting against Stalin. He signed page after page, his trembling hand betraying his fear. But everyone knew. The confessions were written before he even arrived. Yezhov begged for mercy. He wrote letters to Stalin, desperate, pleading, pathetic. In one, he promised his loyalty. In another, he confessed his crimes again and begged to live, even as a janitor, even in exile. He never received a reply. March 1940. A black car arrived at the Lubyanka courtyard before dawn. Yezhov was dragged from his cell, thin, pale, trembling. The guards said nothing. No one ever spoke to the condemned. He was led to a small room with concrete walls. There was only a drain in the floor and a single light bulb. A single bullet ended the man who had ordered the deaths of hundreds of thousands. There were no records of his burial, no grave, no marker, only his name scratched from history, the final cruelty of Stalin's Russia. But the irony remained. Nikolai Yezhov died by the very machine he built, a machine powered by fear, paranoia, and loyalty to one man, Joseph Stalin. In Stalin's empire, loyalty meant nothing. Every man was expendable, even the man who killed millions, for him. By the morning after his execution, it was as if Nikolai Yezhov never existed. Orders came down from the highest office, Stalin's. Every photograph, every document, every film reel that bore his face was to be edited, erased, gone. Posters that once showed Yezhov standing proudly beside Stalin were quietly replaced. In the new versions, Stalin stood alone, smiling faintly. Where Yezhov had once been, there was only water, sky, or shadow. In one of the most famous photos, Stalin standing near the Moscow Canal. Yezhov once stood by his side, wearing a bright military coat. In the corrected version, Yezhov simply vanished. The canal water extended neatly where his body used to be. That's how Stalin ruled. Not just by killing men, but by deleting them from history itself. While Yezhov's name disappeared, another one rose, Lavrentiy Beria. Cunning, ruthless, a man who learned from Yezhov's mistakes. Beria understood Stalin's rule better than anyone. To survive, one must be useful and invisible. Under Beria, the purges slowed, not out of mercy, but efficiency. The machine didn't stop. It simply ran smoother. The prisons filled again, the camps expanded, and fear remained the foundation of Stalin's power. By the 1940s, Stalin was untouchable, worshipped as a god, feared as a monster, and no one dared to speak the name Yezhov. Even after Stalin's death in 1953, Yezhov's story remained buried, until Soviet archives reopened decades later, revealing the full horror of the man once called Stalin's bloody dwarf. He was loyal, he was feared, he killed millions for Stalin, and in the end, he was just another name crossed out in red ink.